The member for Vermilion Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, during estimates of environment and parks, the Deputy Minister said this about the federal government's methane regulations, and I quote, "If we left it to a bunch of pointy-headed, condo-dwelling, cappuccino-sucking bureaucrats from Ottawa to come up with the methane rules, we're not going to like the results." Well, the federal regulations are out, and the Deputy Minister was right. We don't like the results. The federal minister has declared that their rules take precedence. What direction can our minister give to Alberta industry stakeholders who have been waiting months for clarity and are now faced with even more uncertainty?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is true that my deputy has a colourful way of expressing himself. Mr. Speaker, this is why the Alberta Energy Regulator has come out with their directive, which was a result of the Methane Reduction Oversight Committee, a multi-stakeholder group of Albertans who worked very, very hard on a difficult file, which is to achieve our methane reduction targets, Mr. Speaker, in a way that is less prescriptive and less costly to industry. We have published that directive. We published it ahead of the federal government, and it will be that directive that guides our work in our methane reduction strategies.
First supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that we are shaping up for yet another battle with Ottawa over these methane regulations, which are critically important both to our industry and to our efforts to make meaningful and measurable steps to limit greenhouse gas emissions, and given that Alberta and Ottawa's draft regulations are both coincidentally 124 pages long, but that's where the similarity ends, to the Minister, could you provide Albertans with a concise summary of the key differences between the two sets of methane regulations?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be pleased to follow up with the member because I do not think I can give a concise summary in 35 seconds. What I can say is that our regulation came about as a result of a multi-stakeholder process that involved a number of Albertans, Alberta companies, and Indigenous people and others. Mr. Speaker, it is less prescriptive than the federal regulation. It intends to get to the reduction target, but in a way that is less costly for industry, Mr. Speaker, and that was the way that we chose as the government because we understand that the industry wants to do the right thing, but they want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible.
Thank you. Second supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that the federal regs developed by the aforementioned pointy-headed, condo-dwelling, cappuccino-sucking Ottawa bureaucrats have been endorsed by industry critics such as Environmental Defence and the David Suzuki Foundation, and given that they are urging the federal government to supersede the Made in Alberta methane regulations that were developed with Alberta stakeholders, and given that this is yet another example of how the self-flagellation of our economy by the NDP carbon tax has failed to win over the vocal critics of our industry, to the Minister, what specific measures are you taking now to ensure that our methane regulations will in fact take precedence in Alberta?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the action that we are taking is that the Alberta Energy Regulator has published their directive, and we will move forward on that basis. Some more action that we are taking, for example, Mr. Speaker, is ensuring that we have clean tech funds available to companies who want to reduce their methanes. We've published the methane reduction offset protocol, Mr. Speaker, and we've got more funds to come for measuring and reporting for small firms, Mr. Speaker, because we're going to get this job done. We don't need the federal government to tell us how to do it. We'll have a Made in Alberta plan. Thank you.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, a few minutes ago,